Hey, good evening, guys. Just wanted to say thanks to the about a dozen people that watched one of my videos yesterday. So I'm not quite there to YouTube fame with hundreds of thousands and millions of views, but I think 12 is a pretty good start. So I'm gonna ride that momentum into day three of this little video series. Again, we'll keep it light and fun and see how it goes. First off, just figured I'd point out that I'm wearing my Vital Jiu-Jitsu shirt. That's a gym down in Fife in Washington State, which is near Tacoma, and it's one of our affiliate schools. And it's a great gym, ran by a great guy, a jiu-jitsu black belt named Kyle Mitchell. Dude's a beast. That's totally irrelevant to the topic of this video, so I will move on. But just figured I'm wearing the shirt. It's a pretty cool shirt. It's very comfy. That I'd give him a little shout out. So who knows? Maybe in a decade, when this video is just skyrocketed to the moon, Kyle, you can thank me for this little bit of free advertising. Vital Jiu-Jitsu down in Five. Anyways, moving right along, the video that I want to do tonight is three topics, three ideas, or subjects or issues around the liberty movement. So these, or what would these be? Three like kind of platform issues, right? And I think these would likely fall, all three fall within the standard, libertarian party platform. So it would go along with that, but I didn't necessarily draw this from that or go and look and get the ideas from there. As it was just for taking a couple notes before getting started. I thought, oh, I want to do a video about this one at one point. Oh, I want to do a video about that one. And I want to do a video about this one. Well, because I'm not an expert necessarily on any one individually, I figured I'd just kind of throw them out there in more of a broad brush sense to, again, open up the discussion, put the thoughts and ideas out in the world, and then hopefully engage with people in the future about these ideas to learn, and then also, hopefully to persuade other people that these are ideas worth looking into. So the three subjects that I just wanted to mention was one being public schools and the issues with public schools that I guess I was going to say that I see, but maybe that have been kind of illuminated for me and some of the light reading I've done. So public schools, professional licensing. So some thoughts I've had on that in that department, and then lastly, the idea of legalizing drugs. So kind of a broad topic, spectrum of topics here. So we'll just bounce around and see where it goes. So number one is public schools. And so a lot of this, and maybe most of my ideas at this point, are going to be drawn from Milton Friedman. I'm just, once I came upon him, I was into a lot of other information before coming across him, but once I came across him, I just love the way he articulated ideas. And there's a fair amount of actual video of him out there on YouTube, online, the series that he did with PBS. So a lot of these ideas I think are starting from him. So can't take any credit necessarily myself. But that being said, what is the issue with public schools? And I think there's a few, but if you were to summarize it, maybe some of the highlights would be one of the issues is the lack of choice, right? So and it may work differently in a lot of different areas, at different states across the union, but for sure in Washington State, or at least in the area that I'm aware of, you're in a school district, and then the school that you must go to if you're going to participate in the public schools is designated by zip code, right? So if you live in a certain area within a certain boundary, then you must go to the school that you're assigned. And you could say, well, what's the issue with that? But if you ask the question, what other good or service are we limited in that way? Are we forced to use a good or a service simply because of our zip code, right? If I live across the street from a Safeway, and that's the closest grocery store, how is it any different from the state, the local or state government saying, hey, this is your designated shopping center, you must shop there? What if I happen to like Whole Foods or want to save some money by going to Costco, and I want to go across town and shop there because the prices are better or the quality of the goods are better? Any of those reasons may attract me to patronize a different service provider, and so why can't that be the case with the school system, right? And the reason, the pretty obvious sort of systematic reason, right, is that they are administered by the local and state government, right? So that being the case, when a service is provided by the government, it's less nimble, it's less agile, it's less dynamic, it's not subject to market forces that would say, hey, if the school in Kirkland is way better than the school in Juanita, well, then people from Juanita would have an incentive to drive in their kids into Kirkland, to go to the public school there, or go to the school there, and then that school could expand its facilities, it could take on more kids, right? That would be the case if it was in the free market and subject to those forces. And then meanwhile, that school in Juanita would either have to improve the service that it's providing, or it would start to shrink, and then eventually go out of business, right? So that's kind of one dynamic about the school system that's a little bit backwards. And I think that to me, the most unfortunate byproduct of the stranglehold that the government has by having a monopoly on the schooling system is the lack of diversity of outcomes, right? Because in the free market, when the free market's allowed to flourish, you have a huge diversity of outcomes, which we like, right? If the free market puts out 100 different types of cereals, well, that's great. That's something we're happy about, because then you can buy the cereal that you want, and I can buy the cereal that I want, and we're all happy. And there's different types of cereals. Anyway, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it's unfortunate because if the government were to take over the cereal industry, they may determine, hey, this is the most nutritious cereal. It's the easiest and most efficient to make, and it's the most balanced flavor. We're cornflakes, and we're only going to make cornflakes, so everyone gets cornflakes. What an unfortunate outcome that would be in that industry, but that's what we have in the public school system, and the school system in general, because of this government monopoly. So, and so if you could just imagine for a moment and turn off the part of our brain that just assumes it's okay for the government to administer the school system, if we just turn that off and imagine what the world could look like if the free market were able to take over and administer the education of new generations. Imagine the just exciting diversity and the flourishing of outcomes that would come about, right? You would have one school down the street that maybe focused on music, another one on art, another one on engineering, another one on medicine, right? And so you'd have young people, if they had a feeling that they were interested in being a physician, well, why not at an early age as preteens, why not expose them to that and put them on a track to explore that more, and also expose them to it sooner, so that if they get into one of these classes and their stomach can't handle blood or something along those lines, then very early on they can go, yeah, that's not a profession I want to, or academic pursuit I want to pursue. So I'm going to change course, as opposed to the way that it stands now, where we all march through the same 12 years of schooling, and then move on to another 4, and then if you want to become a doctor, you take a year to apply, and then another 4 years, right? And what if at the end of that 16 to 20 year schooling journey, you get to the end of that and you decide, man, I really don't want to be a physician. Well, it's kind of a little too late then, right? So how can we put those forks in the road earlier in life, or make it more dynamic and agile for people to try things out, switch? Maybe later in life they decide, hey, I may have made a mistake, I want to come back and try that out, and make it a lot easier, as opposed to how rigid the system has become. So again, without getting too into the weeds, I just think to me the biggest thing to pose is to imagine what our society could look like with an awesome variety of educational options for young people. And so then, as a parent, if your child's athletically gifted, they can go into a school system where they're going to get the basics and all that, but then they're going to be allowed time to refine their craft to become a professional athlete, or how much further along, or would science or different industries be if young people were given the opportunity to actually engage and learn a craft much sooner in life, as opposed to the way the system's set up now, where again we march through 12 years of schooling and we're spit out on the other side with no real skills to bring to the marketplace. And that's when we just have to enter the workforce and then start to learn valuable skills. So that's maybe what all I'll say for now on the public schooling front. That this may have rambled on a little longer on that particular topic. So we'll see how much time we leave for the last 2. But yeah, so that's topic number 1, was the public school system. And so I just challenge you to imagine, and it may be beyond our imagination, of what kind of diversity and amazing kind of opportunities would start to pop up if the government removed itself from that industry, the education of the schooling of our young people, and allowed different businesses to pop up to meet that demand, and how creative people would get to accomplish that end. So that was number 1. Number 2 was professional licensing, and I think this actually relates to that first point and kind of rolls right into it. And I think it's an interesting idea, and there's maybe a lot of more nuance or technical aspects to professional licensing that maybe I can't necessarily articulate. I'm not smart enough on the subject yet to do so. But I think the big point, or the big question to ask, is why are we depending on the local or state government to provide professional licenses to different professions, right? And the biggest kind of connection that I've drawn to, again, to the public school system, how for me that they kind of relate, is again this idea of becoming a doctor, and how rigid the current path is. And I think that this is something that it's a very entrenched path and a very entrenched profession. So it's not like this would be, who knows, changing anytime soon. But imagine if rather than someone doing the typical path to becoming a doctor, and I probably shouldn't even talk about this because who knows how much I actually know about what it means to be a doctor, but just for a moment, imagine, you go through your schooling, you go through medical school, then you go through some kind of residency, and then you transition into your role as a physician. Well, imagine another scenario where a young person who wants to become a doctor just goes straight to work for a physician, does a bit of an apprenticeship. They maybe work as a medical assistant for a period of time, and then they work maybe as a nurse doing blood draws and giving shots and taking vitals and things like that. But the whole time they're an understudy of the physician, and they're learning and they're observing, say, for a decade. So at that point, would you rather have a physician treating you who has completed the 12 years of schooling, 4 years of undergrad, and then another 4 years of medical school? Or would you rather have someone who, by the time they were 16, was in a doctor's office, learning the trade, seeing all the different ailments that people typically have, and then refining his understanding of the profession for 10 years? Would you rather have that physician on day one if his the doctor that he studied under turned around and said, "Hey, you have now learned enough. I'm going to give you a license. I deem you competent enough to see patients on your own." Would you trust him to give you medical care, or the person who just graduated from medical school? Not that I'm not knocking medical school and the people who get that training. I'm just wondering why we respect just the one path that's the standard at the moment, and part of it is that the other path can't exist, right? The government has told us, in order to be a practicing physician, you have to have this license from our agencies, otherwise it is illegal to practice medicine. And so in order to get our certificate, in order to get the piece of paper from the state that says you are allowed to practice medicine, you have to meet the requirements that they set out. And that means all those steps over here on this side. And I think some people their instinct might be to say that that's not such a bad thing. Hey, they prescribe the steps. Well, who's prescribing the steps? Who's setting the standard, and who's saying, hey, this is the proper path to becoming this profession and being competent enough to practice it? Well, do we really trust a government bureaucrat to lay out those steps and determine who should be able to be licensed as a physician and who shouldn't? I would assume, again, knowing now I'm getting into the realm of where I really don't know what I'm talking about, but that they might turn to different societies or organizations of doctors to then give them those requirements. Well, again, now you have a bit of a distorted incentive, because if I'm and I think that there would be some evidence historically to show this is the case, that if I'm in a profession and I get to tell the government what requirements people must meet in order to enter my profession, well, that's in my benefit to detail them in the way that, or I could then turn that into my benefit to detail the steps in such a way that constricts the amount of people that are allowed to enter my profession. Because just the supply and demand of it, the less people that enter my profession, the smaller the supply of professionals with my allowed to practice my work, the greater the demand. So the higher I can set my prices. I don't believe it's that maybe simplified of a process, because this is our medical system has been a lumbering Frankenstein for many decades. That is what it has become. for many different reasons. So it may not be that transactional or that clear of a path. But that's just one example, again, of this idea of professional licensing. Why do we trust a government agency to tell us who can and who can't practice a particular line of work? Because again, or another point to that is there would never be a lack of licensing agencies. In the work that we do, I just got a report for a community that we service, and it had a report from a playground inspector. So like a HOA condominium playground, and they had a person who inspects playground out to assess the safety of the playground that they have in their community. And in the documents, they had a certificate or recognition from a National Playground Something Safety Association. So that just goes to show you that there would be a huge incentive for third-party licensing and verification agencies to exist, and we could probably trust them more, right? Because if they license bad professionals in that certain industry, the market would recognize that, and eventually they'd either have to fix the way they do business, or they would go out of business as a licensing agency. No one would want their certificate because it means nothing, right? So the same would be true in any profession. So I only point that out to put someone's mind at ease that it's not to say we should take away certifications and licensing to let the consumer know, hey, this is a trustworthy professional, but just really asking the question, why do we allow the government to make those calls? Because the mirror image of the private agencies that I just mentioned is the government agencies that license people. Where is their incentive to do a good job, right? Where and I guess I'll hold off on that point because I don't know if I have enough detail or have thought it out enough to go, what are the consequences when they give someone a license that does poorly? Well, maybe they take away that license, but it's not like they have any repercussions for having made a bad call. Do they have to fix their system in any way, or do they just continue to exist and continue to grow, or not change their standard in any way, shape, or form? Or is the way that they change their standard just adding another piece of paper, another requirement to make it harder for someone to enter that industry? Either way, it sounds like all bad things. So the last point that I left here, and man, I've already been going for 23 minutes, so who knows if anyone will ever make it this far into the video. But number 3 was the legalization of drugs, and just the point maybe worth making here is the war on drugs that has been waged for some decades now. There's some analogies to the prohibition, right? The amount of crime that has spawned in response to creating a black market for these substances is a very real thing. Even the little metropolitan area that we live in, Seattle, we've definitely seen, just in my lifetime, an increase in crime, an increase in homelessness, and so on. And not that you can blame all of that on this particular problem, but well, I think I may have really made some key points in the realm of public schools and in the realm of professional licensing. But then now I'm gathering it back. The point that I think is worth making in the realm of legalization of drugs is just is maybe just questioning the resources of law enforcement and where we want those directed, right? And so I think it was kind of an eye-opening perspective shift for me after the last year that we had. We had 2020 was the the COVID shutdowns, and then that summer was the George Floyd death, which led to big riots in the streets and all kinds of craziness, and political divide between people who are saying defund the cops and people who are saying support, back the blues, support the police. And I remember feeling kind of conflicted and unsure, and so the a point worth mentioning. So in addition to the George Floyd, there was the Breonna Taylor death as well, and I remember when the Breonna Taylor one first happened, I was at a dinner where I just, there was maybe some criticisms being thrown out in both directions, of people on either side of the issue about, the individual saying, wow, she was dating a drug dealer, and whatever the excuses you might make. And so she put herself in harm's way, right? Agree with it, don't agree with it. That's maybe what one, side of the argument might say. The other side of the argument might say, well, the cops were doing a no-knock warrant. They should never be doing that. And of course, the people inside the dwelling are going to look to defend themselves because they didn't know it was the police. And I remember neither of those answers really sitting well with me. And I even at the time questioned individuals putting the blame on the cops. I said, well, if you're putting the blame on the last line of defense, the guy who pulled that trigger, well, it seems like you're a little late in the game, right? It seems like a lot of things must have gone wrong to where that cop was in a situation where he was behind a gun in this person's home. So a lot has gone wrong before that point. And I also think that the way it gets sensationalized, in media or social media is as a big race thing, right? You have these white cops and a home of a black person. These guys are racist, and they went in and murdered these people in cold blood. Well, I mean, maybe. I don't know these guys, and I guess it's possible that they walk around with hate in their heart. But it's also possible that these are just normal people with normal beliefs and normal, likes and dislikes and all that, and they were just there trying to do a job, and ended up doing maybe what most people would have done if they were put in the exact same situation. So then what you ask is, well, how did they get there, right? Because the question I asked, well, was who was giving them the intel that was the house to break into, right? Because it was, from my understanding, later on, a multiple house raid that all happened kind of simultaneously. Well, so do you blame the guy who pulled the trigger, or do you blame the guy who provided the intel and said, hey, this is the house that you guys want to hit? Or do you blame the police chief for approving, or the judge for approving a no-knock warrant? Like, so where on down the line, where do you place the blame? Or do you place the blame on the citizens for, asking and chartering their police force to do certain things like that, right? And so one again paradigm shift was, well, all of this, or a lot of this turmoil that we see, is again from the way that police are being used, the direction we are pointing that service, and it's in the direction of fighting a war on drugs, right? And anytime you fight a war, there's going to be a lot of collateral damage. And so then we just have to ask ourselves, do we want to point them in that direction? Are we willing to accept the collateral damage, or are we not? And that gets into a different discussion of, well, what right do we have to tell someone, what they should or should not be allowed legally to put into their own body, if they're at risk of harming themselves. And I think that's just a slippery slope, and I don't know if I necessarily have the words, and the logic to make analogies like, well, hey, we allow people to smoke cigarettes, eventually that's going to kill them, Two, potentially, whatever. I'm not a scientist, but if that is the case, then how is that different from any of these other drugs that people can abuse to a degree that would harm themselves? Again, I think it's a different story if we're talking about the repercussions of if someone consumes something and they go around harming other people or breaking in to places to support a habit. Again, I feel very differently once they cross a line and start harming other people. Well, then yeah, that's a problem. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to go at the drugs themselves or try and keep people from consuming the drugs or keep people from dealing them. And which comes to maybe the last point on this, which is um, something that I believe and don't know if I necessarily have the evidence to back it up, but is that the product would be a whole lot safer if it was legal, right? So if you think about meth, heroin, I don't crack, cocaine. I'm no subject matter expert on any of these substances, but imagine what it would look like if they were legal and if a storefront that sold these different substances had an incentive to provide a quality product, right? Because they don't want all of their patrons or their customers to overdose and die right away. So they would have an incentive to provide this good to people to satisfy whatever need or demand there is for it. But they would also have an incentive for it to be maybe safer, maybe a little easier or lighter, and not, cut up with. I think you hear horror stories of it being like, mixed with a whole bunch of weird stuff, so it damages the purity of these different hard drugs. So it's like, well, what would it look like in a world where these were legalized and you had storefronts where they had an incentive to provide a good quality product? Now these people, maybe they wouldn't be harmed to such a degree, the actual end user. So anyhow, there's a much bigger discussion there. I have been going for 30-something minutes now, and I think have made some of the points that I hope to make, and we'll call it good for now. But if you have any reaction to any of these points, or if you have any more information, or if I missed anything, anything at all, let me know. And again, I'm here to just throw out some ideas and get some feedback, and I'm out here to learn myself. So anyways, hope you all have a great evening, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.